Lots of clicking tonight. I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We got a pretty nice crowd, and that's kind of a fun thing. I love chatting about wine and do this for fun. And it's just great to get some support and get some great people out on here to talk wine with us. So every year, I look back at the year that we just left. I've been in the wine business since 1995. Um, I was in the restaurant business before that, but been doing this for a while. And it gives me a lot of insight into what's happening, what's going on. And, I make my own wine up in Sonoma County. It's called Beekeeper Cellars. We make Zinfandel. And I've been doing that since 2009. The retail thing with Merchant of Wine, our website, I've only been doing it since the pandemic forced me into it. But these Zooms were also kind of a byproduct of my event business through Learn About Wine. We had to shut Learn About Wine down and kind of get inventive on how to use some of our skills and some of our abilities. And this Zoom product came out of that. So now it's been going into our third year here of Zooming. And I'm very bullish about our Zoom future because it's just reasons like this. We've got people Zooming in from many different countries and many different states. And that's really fun for me. So thank you all for doing this with me and spending some time with me on a weekly basis. Next week, we've got a Zoom where we deliver wine to your home called Heroes of California. 6 really top winemakers I want to teach you, introduce you to. Perhaps maybe you know some of them. There's some famous fellows and there's some up and comers that I want to make sure you know all about and really express, I think, one of the best wines inside of their categories. We'll be tasting a great rosé from Santa Barbara. We'll be tasting a world-class Chardonnay from Paul Hobbs. We'll taste a world-class Pinot Noir from Argo. We'll taste some world-class Syrah from Joey Tensley. We're going to go to Napa Valley with Zeitgeist, a brand maybe you haven't tasted before, but Jennifer Williams was the winemaker at Spotswood, and she makes the wine with her husband, Mark. And they have full-time jobs at very expensive, highly thought of wineries that they make their living doing. Zeitgeist is their little private project, so kind of giving them a little bit of love, but they're fascinating, and that's going to be a really fun show. I think I got 6 wines in there. There are 6 wines. I'm not sure if I forgot somebody. South Africa tasting a week after that. A nice little kind of up to let's talk about South African wines. What's happening there? Of course, during the pandemic, it became illegal to sell wine in South Africa. So the South African market really became dependent on America and many other parts of the world. And there's some damn good wines. And I think South Africa is just continuing to become a better value as their currency gets weaker and weaker and weaker. Portugal, doing very well in the wine market. We're expanding that set of wines all the way from dry to sweet. And we want to make a comprehensive approach on this particular version so we can increase your ability and my ability to speak about great Portuguese wine. So those are some of the upcoming Zooms that we have in the month of January. And that's just kicking us off. We've got Zooms programmed right now at Zoom Into Wine all the way through into March. And probably by next week, we'll have them through June on the calendar. Now, some of you like to buy them way in advance. I appreciate that support. It sometimes takes us a little while to price them, get the wines, because I don't want to post wines in June if we're not going to have those wines. And so I do kind of sometimes postpone some of that excitement, but we're doing things as quickly as we can in the order of priority. But we have a lot of fun doing these things, and getting the winemakers to come on board with us, etc. Takes my team a lot of work, and then we record some videos sometimes. Um, but it's amazing. It's so cool to be Zooming with people in Chile and Spain and South Africa and Napa Valley. Maybe even some of the California producers come on live once in a while. Gosh, we have the New Zealand guys come on live, which is also kind of freakish, but apparently at 7 at night, it's like 2 in the afternoon in New Zealand. So it works out pretty good. Let's talk about 2023, and we'll break it down by month. Just a couple of trends. I don't want to beat this to death, but I really love talking about, reading about, understanding what's happening in the world of wine, the business transactions, the laws that are made. The kind of this is based on a summary that was provided through an aggregate called the Wine Industry News. There are a lot of every year. There's a lot of people that die. I'm not gonna read all the death notices throughout the year, but there are a couple of trends that I do want to highlight, and especially in this year. Let's talk about 23. I mean, we had a year where we saw the cost of money really start to change directions. Prior to this year, 23, money was almost free to borrow, free to get. Now it's getting harder to get, costs more money to get. But you would think that would make transactions kind of drop off the screen. There were some massive transactions this year, but I do think it was left to the very strong. And that's where we see the wine industry, where the strong got stronger and the big got bigger. And probably a lot of the weak went away. I see a lot of closures in wine industry where they were weak brands that never really resonated or showed, a massive amount of interest on a major scale. Those went away. We see some pretty chunky acquisitions going on with vineyard land, even very expensive vineyard land, because like a place like Napa Valley, for instance, you can't buy land and plant anymore. I mean, it is literally not possible to plant more vineyard, not because there isn't land that could be turned into vineyard, because the current vision for Napa Valley and how much acreage, you can turn it into a monoculture, and you can create problems when you're ripping down forests and changing the natural habitat. So they're being very cautious there. They're very green, very, very focused on balance. I think that's good for the vintners that own the land. It's particularly good for the vintners that own land because their land value is skyrocketing. And the few that had to sell or needed to sell, or maybe there was family that, wanted to move on, didn't have an inheritance plan, they did really well. And so those are kind of some of the themes. In the world of distribution, and there's a 3-tier system, and I'm just going to give you 30 seconds on it. Wineries make wine, they sell it to distributors. Distributors sell it to retailers and restaurants. And some states, that's really the way the wine world works. In the state of California, a winery that makes wine in California can sell their wine directly to a premise, whether it's a restaurant or a wine shop or a Costco. They can do that transaction without a distributor. But that's not in every state, and it's really kind of a California thing. Most other states are heavily financed. The politicians in those states are heavily financed by the distributors. And so those distributors have talked them into getting laws in place that require the 3-tier wheel, forever cementing in the importance of having a distributor. Like that or not, that's the way the world is. And so distribution becomes very interesting. And if you're 10 years ago, there was not a single distribution source that you could go to and say, here, take my wine and distribute it throughout the entire United States. That has changed in the last couple of years through acquisition and merger. And we see a couple of these happening right here. Wine Warehouse, small family-owned distributor in California got bought by the national breakthrough beverage and is now connected on a national level. That's almost the same story with almost everybody in California. It's now Southern Glaciers. Young's Market went away and it's now RNDC. And those three are all national now. Almost every state, I think, by each of those companies. Some of them might not have some of the strange lawed states and stuff like that. But when you're talking about, 80-20 Prado principle type stuff, they pretty much represent the entire country now for each of those people. Even Gallo, as important as Gallo is, has multiple distributors in their group. In fact, Gallo is so large, they have separate divisions of Gallo, and one division will be marketed by RNDC, and another division might be marketed by Southern or another company. I don't want to say the wrong company, so I'll just leave it at that kind of thing. And that's my talk about distribution. And so we've seen distribution continue to consolidate. That is terrible for small wineries and probably good for the distribution of the big wineries, and probably good for the distributors that have these ironclad forever type of businesses. Now, there's also something that we could talk about here for just a second before we get too far down the line, but there's this ever continuous trend of about 7 to 8 years in the wine world where the circle goes from, okay, it's now easy to get fruit because there's so much fruit available. Why do we own a vineyard? So they start to sell off their vineyards and just buy fruit, being asset light. And then the fruit, starts to diminish. You start seeing vineyards getting harder to, or the fruit to get harder to get. And so the big and strong and powerful buy the best vineyards, and they start owning all the best vineyards. And then they start devouring their competition, buying up all their competition and adding brands and getting bigger and more powerful, bigger, more powerful. And then we hit an economic moment where the world falls apart and the distribution falls apart, and they start selling off assets and going bankrupt, and the wheel starts back over again. And that's kind of, I'd say right now in the cycle, it's that they're devouring each other and buying up each other because they already own all these vineyards and they want to eliminate competition, and they want to strengthen their mind share for their distributors. If they're not big enough in that distributor, the distributor's not going to pay attention to them. So they're strengthening up their portfolios, adding weight, buying up vineyards to secure their future, and really pushing out the small guys. And that's a theme that's where I'd say we're at in the wheel. A couple of significant deaths in the first quarter. And then we had a pretty powerful transaction where the Dow family gave us a little look into their future because they bought some vineyards in Tuscany. What is Dow doing in Tuscany? Or maybe it's their retirement plan. A few months later, Dow sold Dow Paso Robles Cabernet, Paso Robles Cabernet, sold for $1 billion to the Australians. I've been talking about it so much, I can't remember the name of the brand at the bottom now, but I've literally talked about it 5 hours today. Penfolds bought up Dow, and they are thought of sometimes as a brand that you might see in grocery, chain grocery like Costco. But what you may not know is that Penfolds is a powerhouse direct-to-consumer brand that is really powerful all over the world. and they make a lot of $300, $400, $500, $600 bottles of wine, and they have a wine club that they reward with these massive events and member only kind of invites and stuff. And now they can do what they did that they do that with their Australian portfolio, which is like Grenache, Syrah, Chardonnay, some Cabernet, and now they've got a fantastic California anchor brand that has a lot of mystery behind it, and a lot of people don't know what Paso is about. So they're really kind of helping pioneer Paso on a worldwide basis with this transaction. And Dow is quite diversified. They've got a $300 Cabernet brand called Patrimony, and they've got lots of little lion cub type of cabs that come off of that, and they make a large amount of volume wine sold through Costco's and stuff all over the place, and they can really continue that footprint and do that high end direct to consumer play. So while $1 billion is a massive transaction, I think it's pretty fascinating. That will be one to earmark, because I don't know of any brand in Napa that sold for $1 billion. Okay. Joseph Phelps, I don't think sold for $1 billion. And that's a pretty important brand. So I don't know that number has ever been disclosed, but it's rumored to be around 700 million. And so there are some pretty important big dollar transactions, and that was one of the wow of this year. The Wonderful Company, they own quite a large percentage of the nut industry in California. They own Justin, they own Sonoma brand, they own some other wine brands as well. They're continuing to acquire when it suits them. They had the cash. They probably didn't have to take a loan to buy a 42-acre vineyard. Again, Southern Glacier strikes buying a Caribbean distributor called Webb Banks. Caribbean, Central America, South America. Hey, maybe the distribution game goes international. That certainly looks like what they're going to be doing. And you got to be very careful when you pick your partners on that. But Southern Glacier is expanding on the international side. Again, devouring and getting bigger. Maybe they'll get too big. No, they will get too big. And they will come apart, because history says this will happen. But who knows when? You got a company like Vintage, a big economic engine. They're basically like a hedge fund. And Vintage Wine Estates wrote off only 145 million. That's pocket change, as they probably let go of some dead weight and took a nice write-off. We had locally in Los Angeles, we had a pretty significant thing happen. Christian Navarro, a really sharp guy who comes from the art world to become a wine guy, working for Steve Wallace at Wally's. Wallace retires, sells Wally's to the Marciano brothers, who sold their brand Guess Jeans for $4 billion. And the family Marciano owns a winery up in Napa, and they diversify into buying Wally's. Christian really helped turn it into a restaurant mecca, and I think he did a phenomenal job of turning it into a very desirable destination for Beverly Hills. Launched Santa Monica. I think he had some ideas of taking the Wally's brand on a national basis. I think there is one in Vegas right now. I think that the goal was to get it to LA or to New York and Florida and other places. So it didn't quite get to its potential, but he saw it flourish here in Los Angeles. I do worry about its future, because he was such a strong personality, a strong figure for Wally's, and if they don't fill that void, it could cause some problems And what restaurant is better today than it was prior to the pandemic anyway? I think Wally's will suffer from a million paper cuts because their founder, if you will, really was the backbone. So it'll be very interesting to watch that. The Antinori family had pretty significant growth. Antinori's a behemoth in Italy. They own so many different properties and do so many things very well. And they had a partnership with Stag's Leap Wine Cellars here in California. Well, it came time to figuring out the future, and Antinori took over Stag's Leap Wine Cellars as they were in partnership before. Now they're operating and getting bigger. So again, the strong are getting stronger and growing and finding ways to do that. And nothing backs up that statement more than the very next thing that happened. Duckhorn, a hedge fund, by the way, now, because Duckhorn was purchased by a hedge fund, and they've been buying up brands left and right for a couple of years. They also own this small Pinot producer called Costa Brown, and then a couple other things that they purchased. But in order to have enough capacity for their California brand, which is called what is it called? Not Paradox. They make the California wine, not the Napa Valley Duckhorn, but it's something else.
Decoy?
Thank you. Decoy. That now they take over the formidable Clos de Bois facility. Now, all of us remember Clos de Bois as a Merlot titan, and we all know what happened with Merlot. Thank you, sideways. Very famous New York retailer Sherry Lehman. Apparently, and I'd love to really get to know what happened, because I think this is a movie in the making. This is such an important brand in the forever of wine. I mean, you think of New York and wine, or things that happened way back when, the formidable steps of people who made wine trendy. Sherry Lehman was just about as important a retailer as there ever was. Bankrupt. And so some bad mojo got into the mix at some point in time and just took it down. Very humbling to see a major pillar like that fall. Gallo continues to acquire. The number of times I say that in 23 is pretty staggering. They purchased, and sometimes a lot of these things are, about the financial position that some people might be finding themselves in, because this is a very cash intensive industry. And in order to grow, and you're already big, you need a lot of resources. And the Hahn family was a pretty sizable winery in the state of California, and they got acquired by Gallo. And they're making wines that are about as inexpensive as anybody in the state. So, and I want to say this too. A lot of people hear the word Gallo and don't really understand how good they can be at what they do. They do really come in and get to the core of the business and strengthen it. And oftentimes people are, they're working at wineries that don't have great benefits, and all of a sudden they have them. And then all of a sudden they have a great human resources department, and all of a sudden they've got, training and safety and all these things that come in, because Gallo is hyper compliant with every law in the book. And they have a template and they have a team that does this, and they're super good at it. Now, yes, they do tend to make more wine. Yes, they do tend to expand the number of markets the wine can go into, but they also pump millions of dollars into the facility to improve the wine production, make it safer, make it probably better. And so, you know, from us living in California, maybe us growing up and seeing my grandfather's favorite wine was a $2 jug of Gallo Chablis that he drank on the rocks. And I couldn't change that. When I poured a Grand Cru Chablis in a glass for him, he preferred his $2 jug of Gallo Chablis. That was many generations ago, 50 years ago. This business of Gallo is major now, and they own super premium brands like Paulmeyer. They own some of the major vineyard sources up in Napa. They own a diverse portfolio, and it's only getting more diverse and more spread around different parts of the world. They have a producer that's making an Albarino in Ria Spacious. They have a Pinot Grigio brand in Italy. They have Prosecco. They have categoric wines that you might not even realize are made by Gallo. They purchased a zero sugar canned wine company called Bev, who brought their idea to market and proved that it was a good, profitable opportunity. And boom, Gallo jumped on board and bought it. Again, I'm not trying to disrespect the amazing people that left us in 23, but this could be a very dark conversation if we just talked about all the people that died, because they do a good job of memorializing them on this document. Rodney Strong, already a sizable grower, bought a 335-acre vineyard to take their total acreage to 1,200 acres. That's sizable. Spring Mountain Vineyard, unfortunately, they were in bad financial shape and went bankrupt, and $42 million for the property. What was the famous TV show in the 1970s that took place there? Falcon's Crest. Is that right? I never saw the show, but there is an epic who was the late night talk show host with the red hair? Conan O'Brien takes a tour of a winery in Napa Valley. It is one of the funniest 5-minute YouTube visits you'll ever take. Google search Conan O'Brien visits Napa Valley and watch that video on Spring Mountain. It is unbelievably funny. It is super TV. So RIP Spring Mountain Vineyards, which I think is actually going to stay as a brand. And they're just going to reposition it with new ownership. To be determined, though. Frescobaldi got in the act, bought a little brand called Domaine Roy. I actually carry the Domaine Roy wine in my store. That caught my attention because it was a brand new brand. They say it was founded in 2012, but nobody heard about this wine from Domaine Roy until his dad sold his winery up in Oregon, and the Etzel family had some really important Oregon wine coming out of their winery. And Domaine Roy was a fairly ambitious young startup and got bought up pretty quickly. So congratulations to them. The wine they made was delicious, and we'll see where they go from here. But Frescobaldi, he's been buying up some very important assets too, and quite a interesting move. Okay, that went way too far. Let me try to find out where it was. Okay, let's not do that again. All right, there we go. Another Gallo super move, Rombauer. That one set people back, because this is the time where they didn't go and buy a brand that was in trouble, a brand that wasn't making money that they could polish up. They bought the champion of California Chardonnay, and that nobody saw coming. So it was pretty outstanding. And again, Dow sold for $1 billion. Rombauer sold for 600 million. I scratched my head. What was that other Gallo thing there? They picked up distribution of a small, a formidable icon from Australia called Wira Wira, and those wines were fantastic. And I had them in my store. All of a sudden, they lost their distributor. I couldn't get them. So that's interesting that Gallo is down there in Australia. And the fact that they got in business with that iconic brand is very interesting. They're only doing distribution for them, but quite interesting. Now, St. Superi is a very good Napa Valley producer. I'm not sure if you knew that they were owned by Gucci. The Gucci group owns St. Superi, and they, when they bought St. Superi, bought a very large vineyard to go along with the purchase of the brand. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to ignore the chat box, but thank you for saying treasury. I'm sure that was a well-timed response, and I didn't see that. Miss Ronay, or is that George? George, are you joining me tonight? I don't see you in my photos, so you're welcome to speak at any point in time. Any of you are. So, oops. St. Superi bought another 48 acres. That doesn't sound like a large vineyard, but it was from LMR, which is a pretty important grower in the Napa Valley too. And St. Superi is looking to grow their Sauvignon Blanc business, and this was a good transaction for them to be able to get some grapefruit from a very good ranch. Hi, George. I see you responding there. Thanks. So that was a pretty important spot. 48 acres is a big chunk of the Napa Valley. So, and Sauvignon Blanc is a big future in the Napa Valley. I mean, going from a bottle of wine that's probably associated more, an LMR Sauvignon Blanc would probably have been about $28 at retail. I think the future of Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc is in that $50 to $60 range, and St. Superi can do that. They have some really high-end Sauvignon Blancs, and they have a really great winemaker from, I think he's New Zealand, who's done a great job there. More consolidation inside of the grocery market as well. Winn-Dixie, 400 stores. I remember when I was studying for the MW, having to know what percentages of the market that some of these grocery chains had, and Winn-Dixie was a big piece of the puzzle. And now they're part of an acquisition. So the grocery industry is just continuing to kind of devour each other. And I think that's, with the change of the way the world is, now we have our groceries delivered, and it's going to continue to get more interesting. Here comes Gallo again, buying up a teeny little white wine producer. Consolidate, yes, George. Ian J. Gallo purchases Manassian. There, it's a really nice, high quality white wine producer, white wine only producer. So kind of on a roll with the white wines, pretty interesting. Vine Cliff Winery sells in the Napa Valley. Interesting combination of War Room cellars and Todd Hollow wines. For some reason, that's catching my attention because I really like those Todd Hollow Chardonnays at their price point, and they got purchased by a portfolio that owns Bonnie Doon and Lapis Luna. Thought that was an interesting one. Here comes Duckhorn again. Purchases the Chardonnay juggernaut Sonoma Cutrer. When I was a salesperson on the street back in the late 1990s, Sonoma Cutrer was the best Chardonnay you could buy. I mean, it was up there with anything. And they got purchased by a portfolio that owned Fetzer and a couple of other larger grocery store brands, and kind of got operating like a grocery store brand. And so the acquisition of Sonoma Cutrer by a really good direct-to-consumer manager like Duckhorn, I think we'll see a return of higher quality wines to Cutrer, and they'll probably exploit some of that potential that maybe is being left off the table a little bit with brands like Costa Brown, because they're so Pinot focused. Maybe they'll share some of the wines, etc., and that they can really control that market segment. It's a very interesting acquisition. Any of you have any questions, I'm happy to make any comments. George, thanks for participating. He asked me not to forget that Kroger is trying to merge with Albertsons. That'll be a big one. I mean, Kroger and Albertsons have been merging with other brands for years, and they're giant in their own sight. So for those two to get together, and it's really kind of a sign of what's happening with grocery, and how it's all about market share. Could get very interesting. Lots of regulatory issues throughout every year. Sometimes we don't see them, make the front page, but there's just been constant pushback by Napa Valley to allow vineyards to get planted, and very few get through. And you've really had to be a great steward to get any kind of progress made in the Napa Valley over the last couple of years. And so some very well-moneyed people are trying their best, and it's just not going very well. So if you own a vineyard in the Napa Valley right now, you're in really good shape. And we finished the year with the death of Mike Gerkich, really a long-term, 100-year-old winemaker who had incredible ups and downs, and probably would best be remembered as the winemaker that made the white wine that won the Paris competition of 1976 with the 1974 not Gerkich Hills, but Chateau Montelena, where he was the winemaker. And that was quite an eventful life. There's some darkness in his story, but I think we'll remember him for some of the better things. Now, my commitment to today was to not just talk about some of the business stuff that has taken place, but now we're going to look at the top 100 lists of the year. We used three sources: James Suckling, the Wine Spectator, and Jeb Dunnick. Now, I'm not sure if Robert Parker's publication, which he doesn't own anymore, it's owned by a investment group that owns the Michelin Guide. I'm not sure if they make a 100 list anymore. If they do, they don't allow anybody to see it, but it is not something I found from Robert Parker this year. And I do believe that the Parker publications really suffered from a lot of staff leaving in the past year, as well, or even 2-3 years, as well as change of ownership and probably some change of direction. So we'll see what's happening with Parker going forward. Still love the publication, still love the reviews, but they're not participating in these top 100 aggregate lists anymore, which can be a little silly. I mean, how do you taste 100,000 wines and remember what were the best 100? And I want to tell you a little bit about the kind of the, maybe the Wizard of Oz type of thing, like the magic behind the curtain, really kind of the success story for a lot of wines. And I'm not going to say individual brands, but sometimes an individual brand is strong enough. I'll give you an example, something like a Krug or a Dom Perignon, where they have their own PR agency that just happens to be in New York, where the Wine Spectator offices are. PR agencies are super important to how these people, Suckling, Spectator, Dunnick, Parker, all these guys get their samples to taste. Sometimes, first of all, let me tell you, none of these guys pay for these wines. There used to be a time, I think Robert Parker was a lawyer, and he stated that he used to buy his samples. That is not how he went out. And the Spectator, Wine Enthusiast, other publications, you submit samples. Wine Enthusiast actually asks you to pay to have your sample reviewed. Maybe it's not reviewed, but if you want it published, you have to pay. If you want it published in color, you pay a larger amount. If you want to have an article written about you, you pay even more. So that's a pay-to-play publication, and that's not even a secret. They are very much straightforward about that, pretty much, I guess. Spectator has been criticized for their full-page ads in their magazine by certain wineries, and then all of a sudden they end up with a top 100 wine. I'm not sure that is unfair to say or fair to say. I am not saying it happens. I'm just saying that that's a criticism that's been out there. And it could purely be coincidence. But when I look at the list of the wines in these lists, I made a couple of pretty easy observations. And what I was looking for were like some overall trends, because sometimes there's a vintage, I'm going to say it right now, Bordeaux 2020 apparently is pretty damn good, because it proliferates these review hot top 100 lists. There's a lot of champagne in these lists, a surprising number of champagne, actually. I'm going to also say that the PR agency that's representing the Chianti Classico growers and producers has done a very good job. Congratulations, because Chianti has been screaming and crying, why aren't we getting the press that Brunello's getting and other super Tuscans are getting? Chianti's great. We need the world to know about it. So they hire a good PR firm, and they started to show up in number. I mean, strange, odd number of Wine Spectator top 100 wines are Chianti. And I do think there's a lot of, Spectator even tells you every year, this year we're really influenced by the economy, and we're looking for wines that deliver value and this and that. That's not what they said this year. This is an issue where they're probably picking wines that are a little bit more worldly distributed. They're not a lot of teeny little producers, but they're big financial supporters of the ecosystem of wine. And there's a really interesting mix in there. We're going to go through these a little bit more granular in a moment. James Suckling lives apparently in a vacuum tube of oxygen, flying around the world, tasting wines. Now, I know James very well. He's a good friend, and he has a great team that he works with, and he's really developed that team. His list is so international that I think it wasn't until wine number 42 from his list that we actually see a wine from California make his top 100. Here's the California wines. I'll get the other publications. Oh, wait, it's number 54. And what I will be critical of Suckling for is that from California, apparently he's not tasted anything new or exciting in a while, because only Rain, Paulmeyer, Kistler, and one other, the Hilt and Literai. Those are the 5 wineries. And Chardonnay, Pinot. I was shocked. There's no Napa Cab in his top 100. And he is the king of 99, 98, and 100-point scores, but none of the Napa Valley Cabs that he gives scores to made the list. These 3 lists really have very little Napa Valley Cab in them. Dunn does very well here with their 2019 from the Spectator, and BV, which I think the Spectator, by the way, gave a perfect 100 score, but the Spectator didn't put the 19 BV George in this list. Maybe they did last year. I thought it was interesting that the 19 BV George made it to Dunnick's list this year, because I think it might have been in the Spectator last year. But here's how I broke it down. I took the master list that we made, and we typed these in one at a time. And the way they're listed is they don't often tell you the country. So I read them as carefully as I could, and I said, which one are French? And I went through, and we'll just take a look here. France did really well on all 3 lists. There is a lot of Bordeaux. There's a lot of Champagne. There's almost no Burgundy. A little bit of Chablis, I think, made the list. There's some great Rhones, and I'm going to give each of you a copy of this list that are watching this tonight, so you'll be able to devour this information later at a really nice, intimate level. But what I'm always looking for is, like, is there a single wine brand that got named on all 3 top 100 lists? And the one producer that I think pulled it off this year is Rain. Raen. That's the young Mondavis, and they appear in all three lists that we're looking at today. And I think that is it, but I can't be 100% sure that categorically Bordeaux is so strong that it's very possible that the same Bordeaux wine is on all three lists. And this took way more time than I thought it was going to be. I was going to break it out like 15 ways. Just breaking out France, Italy, and California took me over 2 hours. So, and I'm sure I missed some. So I keep going back and trying to look at it. Let's look at it from, that was France. This is Italy. And the number one wine from Suckling in this year was a champagne. The number one wine from Spectator this year was a Brunello di Montalcino. So that's another trend that I do see, even though Chianti does really well. And maybe this is something, there's something behind this. Maybe I'm just creating a conspiracy theory. But Chianti gets a lot of love this year from the Spectator. So maybe that's why they made the number one wine a Brunello di Montalcino. But the apparently the 18 Brunello di Montalcino is very good. 19 is also getting some reviews here. So I'm not sure of where the line was drawn when they were going to consider samples, because 19 Brunello di Montalcino should not even make it into this country until 2024. So how that made it into a 2023 top 100 list is kind of weird to me. We go down the list here and we'll see that's 2 Chiantis from Spectator. There's 3, there's 4. There's another Montepulciano one, but it's a Vino Noble. And maybe it's 19 and 20 Sangiovese that we should be paying attention to. That's 5 Chiantis right there. Oh, there's 6. 6 out of the top 100 wines. I think that's a lot. There's 7. Here comes, I think there's a number 8 here. So we're at 7 Chiantis, if I caught them all from the Spectator. 7 of 100 in one publication. Does that seem like a lot to you? That seems like a lot to me. However, to give them some support, Suckling is also seeing the light. Not as dominant, but there are a couple of really strong references in Italian wine, but it's a lot more diverse. And frankly, actually, I don't even see a Chianti now that I say that. It's all over Italy though, and that makes a lot of sense because Suckling he has a house in Tuscany, and he wrote for the Wine Spectator for a long time, like 20 years. He was the Italian wine writer. So for James to only have the wines that he has in Italy this year, I think that's saying a lot also. And some of the brands that he's putting in this top 100 list are like, of course, you're going to put Setta Ponte in the list. And of course, you're going to put Ornellaia on the list. And of course, you're going to put La Pupili and Robert Vasario and BB Gratz. These are great personalities that James is very close to, and I'm sure he tastes them, with a Florentine Bistecca in their castles. So this is interesting. So some light showing of Italians in the Suckling 100. I was actually impressed that Dunnick even has as many Italian wines as he does, because to my knowledge, he's never worked or written for an Italian publication, but a pretty nice and diverse list. He goes kind of all over from Barolo to a lot of Barolo, actually, more Barolo than anything else. All right, let's go to California. Take a look. We've already talked about James. James just being critical. Don't take it personally. So James, pretty light on California. Stays right down the path of classics. And California in 23, a lot of wineries were skirting around 2020 vintage fires, and 21s are just coming out right now, and they're probably not what you want to be submitting to critics until now. So that will probably change. His list will probably change drastically in 24. And yeah, I'm sure that is the heart of what's going on with James Suckling, is the fire vintage of 2020. And no, none of the Napa Valley wines from 2020 are going to make the top 100 lists. That's just not going to happen. Now Dunnick lives, I believe, in California, and he is rooted in drinking Rhone Valley wines from his work with Robert Parker, and also his love of Washington, and also Paso, etc. His number one wine, though, I found very fascinating, was Rocchioli Pinot Noir, which didn't make anybody else's list, but to have that show up at the very top is fantastic for Rocchioli, a great brand, great producer. I'm sure it's beautiful. Joffers, BV, Rivers Marie, which is a great Thomas Rivers Brown Pinot Noir. Rain, there is the Rain presence, and Rain made it to all three lists. Top Posse, anybody ever heard of that one before? I have not. Occidental makes the list on 2 occasions in a pretty strong showing here. Occidental, I think, was in the top 10 of the Spectator. Yeah, number 2 in the Wine Spectator, and showed up also here again. I tried to buy that wine, but unfortunately, by the time I read the publications, it was gone, and that is not a wine I was able to sample this year. I am all over the L'Aventure wines. Had them on our show recently about Paso, and we tasted the 2021 or the 2020 Estate Cuvée, I think, on that show. His wines are so good. Robert Mondavi, Jada, Cinquenon, Kistler makes 2 showings with 2 different wines on the 3 lists. That's pretty impressive. Brewer Clifton, he gets a little love. Greg Brewer makes the wine for Brewer Clifton. He also makes Diatom, which Wine Spectator put at number 37. So congratulations, Greg, for a nice showing there. Bedrock, Brave and Maiden, Santa Barbara's own Brave and Maiden. Carlisle, Hamill family. I think I highlighted that. That's not California, is it? If anybody knows. And Andromeda is California. Let me click in here and see what we've got going on.
Doing a quick search on Vivino, it looks like it's from Sonoma Valley, Hamill family.
Thank you. Perfect. I gotta tell you, this, I have the Melville Donna's Syrah on my website. I'm not sure if I did or did not include it in one of my top 10 wines that I tasted this year, but it absolutely should be up there. It was, I tasted with Chad Melville at a tasting, and that wine blew my mind. And it is etched in my brain. I've tasted a number of these wines, so some of them surprised me to see them. Some of them did very well. I think Helen Keplinger is one of the great uncelebrated. She is celebrated, but I often not mentioned when we start listing the great producers in the Napa Valley. She worked for Heidi Barrett for a long time, and she gets some of the best fruit, and her Cabernet is so sexy, great. And so I've carried that every single year. Law Estate, friends of mine, but they were making very little wine in 21. Their new winemaker's fantastic. I don't have it currently, but I'm trying to get some. But I've been shut out for a little while. When you're an online retailer only, they offer it out to their on-premise restaurant partners first, and the on-premise restaurants may have taken it all before it gets down the food chain to an online retailer. So I might not get any Law Estate this year, but you can start to see the love of Syrah with him in this back half of his top 100 list. Andrew Murray, Schaefer Relentless, Lenny Colado, Corliss Red, Saxum, Nicora. Here's a fantastic Cornas. Couple of cabs here, 21s, and an Ovid 19. Shannon 21, Biennacido, Vine Hill. From the Spectator, More Solely came in at number 100 with a cab from 2019. This Cathard family estate, founding brothers, Napa Valley 2020. Can someone search that and see, is that a cab 2020, or is that a blend, like a Merlot based blend? I thought that was the only 2021 I found on these lists from Napa Valley, and I'm not sure what that is. That's pretty geeky small. Pizzoni.
Yeah, it's called the Founding Brothers Red.
So is there a lot of Merlot in that wine? Merlot Cab Franc? They could pick that pretty early.
Cab Sauv, Cab Franc, and Merlot. I can try to find the breakdown of grapes.
How much is that wine? Do you see that on Wine Searcher?
On Vivino, what's the 2020 vintage is $235.
Okay, so it's not a mass produced wine, it's a teeny little gem. Love to find out more, but I actually never heard of it, never tasted it. Have you tasted that, Natalie?
No, I have not.
Oh.
Sounds beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it's always great to see someone make something great, and for a national publication to find something that's that boutique. But I have a hunch that instead of them trying to sell their wines in Los Angeles, they have some sort of New York connection, and they're there pretty well represented in New York, and so the publishers there tasted the wine in New York, and that's how it happens. I'm telling you, these PR agencies and New York based restaurant darlings are going to get more opportunities with the Wine Spectator because they're based in New York. Frank family got a nice mention with a 2018 somehow made the 23 list, so that's pretty interesting. Groth Sauvignon Blanc from 2022, Flowers Pinot. These are much more available type of wines. That's what my point is. Iron Horse, Russian River, it's their Brut, Green Valley Russian River Classic Vintage 2019. Alexander Valley Zinfandel, great for the Zin market to get a little Zin love, and they're very good people. Saxum made a couple of lists. I think he made Saxum made Wine Spectator with James Barry and made Dunnick with Four Hearts. Diatom, as we talked about. Good number of sparkling references. Domaine Carneros here. A Sauvignon Blanc made the top 30 wines, and a Sauvignon Blanc that's like cheap. So that's probably the point. And that's where I think that the Spectator has, they have a lot of different reviewers and they have a lot of different initiatives, and they don't want to just make it the top 100 wines that they put in their mouth, but sprinkle in some stuff that you can actually find out there in the stores, like, Master Bernardino, Terrassi is 2016. It's a legendary vintage in and around southern France or southern Italy, and this wine needs a decade, and is probably pretty well available. And Master Bernardino is not a teeny producer, but there's Lynch Bage, pretty well positioned. Antinori, Pichon Baron. Yeah, George, you're a Lynch Bage hoarder. I know. George Renee's watching the Zoom tonight. He was my boss in 1997, George. Last century, he said. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, so Spectator does a nice job of sprinkling it all over the place. Very strong Bordeaux, and a good number for Suckling. Look at the love he gives the white wines, Rieslings, Chardonnay, Sauvignon, Alsace, Riesling. I mean, how many 100 lists have 3 Rieslings in a row? That is crazy cool. I am team Riesling. I love Riesling. I don't understand how the world doesn't drink more Riesling. But I will say also, I think trends swing both ways. And the trend towards, oaky, buttery Chardonnay swung out so far that everyone started to hate it, and it's starting to swing back. And California is starting to make wines more restrained than they are making them in Burgundy. And you're going to see some things change on these lists. And maybe, wines like Riesling and Chardonnay have another game coming down the pipeline here. There is champagne sprinkled throughout these lists in a pretty generous way. Now, Suckling made it a $280 number 26 Laurent Perrier, which I have in my store. And I have the special limited edition number 26 with the metal basket on the outside of the bottle. I have 2 of those left. That's a 100-point wine, and that is pretty cool. I also have the number 2 wine on his list in my store, the Gran Enemigo single vineyard Cab Franc from Argentina. There is a sneaky number of Argentine wines in Suckling and in the Spectator. My Bodega Chakra buddy is on the list. So quite a few kind of regular stars on James' list, but also some really interesting focus on the Rieslings. Super excited about that. And a lot of reference to some of the great historic producers like Errázuriz from Chile, Kimo River, These are just classic references. Krug. So very interesting to see how the lists are broken out. Again, if I could have just spent like another week doing this, I could have lined up like how many Tempranillo made these lists, and I think that would be like under 5. How many, I saw 0 Merlot except for the Bordeaux's that are significantly with Merlot. Quite a few Barolos. Barolo continues to shine. 2019's decorate these lists all over the place. 18 as well, and some trying to find another reference just to make sure. 21s appear to be very good as well in places like Chianti, like Barbera, like you got some references in the Rhone for 2020, 2019s, and 2021s. So kind of a nice little symphony of different vintages there. And fascinating. George, you can help me anytime you want, buddy. Yeah, you're retired. You got some time. If you want to tap and stare at this into the abyss, that is great. We love doing this type of looks, and it helps me see how I did with the wines that I bought. Sometimes if I look at the list and I see a wine that I tasted, why didn't I buy that wine or whatever? But I honestly, I only get to taste certain number of the wines that when some of these things get offered, it's not because there's samples in the salesperson's bag. Salespeople show up and they say, oh, by the way, this wine's going to be available next week and it's going to be available for about 4 days. Do you want some? And so you sometimes have to taste what from your own supply, or you go to the trade tastings and hope that they're pouring those wines. I do a lot of that. And I can't afford to buy everything for my store, but I do buy things that I tasted or have at least some knowledge about how good it is before I buy it, and do everything in my power to make sure I get a chance to taste it. Sometimes that justifies me putting it into one of our Zooms. And that's what we do at Zoom into Wine. We taste some of the greatest wines made, and we reference some of these lists just to kind of say, hey, do you remember tasting in our Barolo tasting, the 2019 Barolo from E Pura? Let's see if I can get rid of that box. Can't click on it because that box is in the way. We tasted Chiara Bocci's Barolo, and that was just a couple of weeks ago in our Barolo tasting. That was the wine, and it's in my store, and I don't even know if that was the best Barolo that night that we had. And that's the way the wine world works. Some days are better for some wines than others, and someday we're better than others. So it's a combination of who's tasting it and when and where. And even Robert Parker is famous for saying, the difference between a 98-point wine and a 100-point wine sometimes is what I had for lunch. Questions, comments, ideas for me?
Ian, I do have a quick question. If you can hear me,
Please.
I'm using my iPad here for the first time on this.
All
Um,
right.
I was planning to ask you about Bien Nacido Vineyard, and
Okay.
then I noticed that they were, I think, the second last on one of the lists there,
Cool.
maybe the Dunnock list.
Okay.
Um, I used to always look for Bien Nacido, when other various wineries were making them around like 2016, 17. And then, as you know, they started putting out wines under their own brand. Um, do you see them kind of falling off from this like this because they're putting out more of their own wines?
First of all, that's a nicely thought through question. Let me say this, and I could be proven wrong, but no, I think Bien Nacido is as important a grape grower as there is in California. They are a massive vineyard, by the way, 1,600 acres, one of the largest in the state, and they sell fruit to hundreds of wineries. I'm sure that most of the wine that they or grapes that they sell are, blended in with other vineyards, whether it's because the Bien Nacido is making the wine better, or maybe they're blending it in with other good fruit. It depends on the producer. So not everything not every Chardonnay you taste is Bien Nacido, but Bien Nacido might be in every Chardonnay you taste. It is a very important spot. So the one that did make the list is a really good producer, and he is really well liked. And if you read Dunnock, you'll see him getting some massive scores. And I just think that when you're a really good Chardonnay producer, it's like a brand like Literai or a brand like Kistler. How many Chardonnays do you make? You might be making 10, 12 different Chardonnays a year. And so the opportunity for these guys to find a vineyard designate that they loved enough to put on these lists might be making it hard to see a lot of Bien Nacido references. But I don't think there's any slacking off. And in fact, if I know what's going on at Bien Nacido, and I'm not privy to anything super insider, but I have spent a good amount of time there, and I have met with the Miller family on a number of occasions. And I think they're just diversifying so that, if Chardonnay trends or Pinot Noir trends change in a fast and furious way, that they have a brand that can buy their own fruit. And that's basically it. It's not them trying to make more money. It really isn't. It's them trying to protect themselves and have a source. Maybe it allows them to raise the prices and make it more difficult to buy their fruit. And if you don't buy it, they'll buy it themselves. That could be the truth, but I doubt that it's anything too dark. And they're so big that there's very few people that even know where Santa Maria is in Santa Barbara, because Bien Nacido's usually what people promote instead of saying Santa Maria.
I see. Yeah, makes sense.
Oh, interesting.
I've biked that road many times, and it's a lovely spot. Adds to
Yeah,
the appeal of it.
fantastic. And some of Cinquinan's great wines came from Bien Nacido, and they've had some unfortunate things happen recently with like Aubin Clement and the owner there dying, and there's definitely some things that have maybe shifted the needle around a little bit there. but I think they'll still be very important several years from now.
Cool, thanks.
My pleasure. Good question. Jeff, how you doing? I can't hear you yet, but
I'm good. I'm on mute. I'm on good. I would like to know, and with 2024 and especially being Los Angeles or California, with the labor market and labor costs, do you see restaurants just getting away from pouring money into wine programs, somms, or going more by the glass, or just cocktails are still all the rage? And I mean, what are your kind of more predictions for, the microclimate of Los Angeles in 2024 with wine?
That's so great that you asked that question, because I thought, where could I take some of the topicality today? And yeah, you could look at the marketplace of restaurants and see, literally in Los Angeles anyway, because we're a little spoiled, right, Jeff?
Yes.
we sometimes think that Los Angeles is the world, and it's just our world. But
Right.
You get outside of Los Angeles, and there are a lot of chain restaurants, and then there's the small mom and pops in every single marketplace. But in Los Angeles, we've got this really interesting mixture of restaurants, and the new hipper restaurants that have kind of opened up on smaller budgets, and they come in and they've got these very cocktail driven, bartender driven, mixology driven programs. And with all the mixology in the world, all I'm hearing in the year 2023 was the return of the martini. And martinis have really been huge. Now, I think too, you also got to think about the fact that there are now, if you look at the demographics and the way things are working out, I'm part of the Gen X grouping, but millennials aren't necessarily drinking wine, is what we're all noticing. And that's maybe could be an overreaction, because things change. You drink what you think you should be drinking at a particular age. You get fat, and then you start to worry about calories and your heart and your blood and all that stuff. And wine tends to be where you end up going, because it's still testing pretty well in improving health and longevity and and that type of stuff. Whereas chocolate martini is kind of like the frappuccino of Starbucks. Very, very, very sugar intensive, and those can catch up with you. So I do think that the trend will, the pendulum will swing. But you look at a lot of the wines that we celebrate on these top 100 lists,
Right.
And these are a lot of expensive wines. There's a really interesting analysis would be on price, and I can, just by looking at the bottom 10 here, you'd have a hard time finding a wine under $50 retail. That Bienacido Shannon wine is probably a $60 Chardonnay. And there's several multi-$100 bottlings here on the bottom 10 of the list. So, this wine can be pretty elitist in that way. I'm not saying it's not worth the money. I'm just saying it takes a lot of money to make great wine.
Right.
It takes a lot of money to buy great wine. And so, you can go in and by the way, you tend to walk into a restaurant and order a martini because it's a pain in the ass to make it home.
Right.
And you can open up a bottle of wine at home, but you probably don't want to make a chocolate martini. And so it is a bit of a destination driven beverage. And if you are lucky enough to get some of these wines, maybe you're taking them to dinner at a restaurant that doesn't have a great wine list. And I think that's a big part of the future too, if restaurants don't get to a point where they stop allowing corkage. And I do see a larger and larger number of restaurants either disallowing it or allowing only 2 bottles or allowing, cork, with a very high corkage fee. So it's almost like not allowing it. But if you're taking a really special bottle of wine out to dinner, I don't care, charge with corkage, and it's still a good deal for everybody. If you're taking a $10 bottle of wine out to dinner, pay corkage, then you don't know how it works. and that's okay too, but you probably should just buy a wine off their list. But I think wine in restaurants is going to be challenged. And so what California is starting to do is, here in LA, if you've noticed or not, is there's a lot of wine lists that are written like where they say skin contact whites you've never heard of before, or maybe chillable reds you've never heard of before. Natural wines are the solution for a lot of restaurants to be able to have something fun and good with the food that's affordable. And they're affordable because they're made in a pretty fast to market style. They may even still be fermenting in the bottle, and they're put into the wine marketplace pretty quickly. And I really think it's a powerful trend that is potentially the tail that will wag the dog. And maybe 5 years from now, we'll be seeing a natural wine made by Saxum that's pet nat, because that's how you can get it to the marketplace very quickly and inexpensively. I don't think Saxon will do that, but I do think that that's kind of the example I pulled just because I'm staring right at the name on the list. But it is a trend that is very strong here in Los Angeles. Right. Our young sommelier that work in restaurant. You don't have a lot of restaurant somms that are 50 plus years old. They're typically between 20 and 30 years old. They get introduced to new things because those brands are out actively hustling, trying to get them into restaurants, whereas a lot of these brands don't actually do that. And and I think that also we do see that cocktail thing very strong. The beer thing is still very strong, and wine is fighting a quality battle for hearts and minds. At the same time, you could walk into a store that looks like an Apple store and buy a gummy that's a hell of a lot cheaper than a 100-point bottle of wine. And then there's a lot of answers for people's recreational departure than wine. Again, I do think it comes down to where you are in your life curve and how you're going to look at your future and where you want to park your dollars. And I think that you don't tend to men don't start showing up to my wine classes until one of two things happen. Their date brings them to my class, or they're turning about 35, 36, and they're starting to figure out that they don't know enough about wine. And maybe they want to impress a date or impress their colleagues at work, and they're getting there. Women have always been the core of my classes. They're much more in the wine curve than the men, and that's always been the case. But I do notice that my audience isn't as young as it used to be, but I'm not as young as I used to be either. So that's how I think you kind of get the audience you deserve. And I don't spend a lot of time marketing to younger people. Any other comments or questions, ideas? Well, I just want to talk for a second about something that's coming down the pipe. I've been working hard on my trip to Burgundy. And so we do have a trip to Burgundy available. All of our trips are available at Learn About Wine. So you can go up here onto our calendar, pull down to wine travel, and you'll see the different things that we have coming up. There is some urgency on Burgundy, so that's why I'm talking about Burgundy and not the other not the other trips. But why did I just find Argentina when I clicked on Burgundy? That could be bad. Let me see what happens here. I'll try it one more time. It's not the way I like to discover mistakes on the website. There we go. It was just something that happened. So there's our dates. We're collecting $1,000 deposits. Here's a summary of the trip. I've started to layer in a little bit more detail as we get closer to the trip. We start to talk about where we're staying and where we're eating and things that are happening. Getting some tours of some of the wineries posted that we'll be visiting, and some of that detail, very granular at this point. Probably won't get too much more information up here, but give you a nice, feel for the trip. We end up in Lyon on this particular version, and staying at some really good hotels and doing some really fascinating stuff. The group is diverse in age. A good number of single travelers coming with us. Welcome for couples, but you do not have to be a couple to join our trips. Absolutely not. If you want to share your room with somebody, you can, but come alone and enjoy. We really connect at a very nice level. It's an intimate group, probably 10 to 12 for Burgundy is what we're going to be looking at. And we're there for just about a week, which is about the right amount of time. If you want to extend with me into Bordeaux, we'll be talking about Bordeaux next week, and putting a little bit more time into Bordeaux over the next week and getting a little more detail there. But they're both planned for back-to-back weeks. It's optional to do both. You can go for one, you could go for the other. And these are things that I love to do, and we put a lot of time in making our trips ourselves and working with some great local professionals over there to make these things happen. So that's our trip to Burgundy, and you can see all of our different upcoming travel opportunities on the travel page. Argentina in October and Spain in November, and Piedmont in December. Spain rolls right into Piedmont. I've talked about our upcoming Zooms. We are also in our Zoom membership drive the last couple days here. Does it end tomorrow? What's tomorrow? Tomorrow's the 4th. I think it's the 10th that we end our membership drive. So if you want to look at our Zoom into Wine membership, we have some benefits. The membership starts at $50 for the year. It invites you to every Zoom we do every Wednesday. Not that you have to attend, but you'll always have the Zoom link, and you can always join us. Sometimes there are wines that you may want to taste, and that would require an additional fee to get the wines delivered. but sometimes we even have member rates that keep the prices really affordable. Foster, I just described you perfectly, you said. Are you still there, Foster? I think Foster disappeared.
Yeah, for sure. I stopped drinking beer in my early 30s, and then I was like, we should figure out some wine. And so, yeah, I'm right in that demographic you just described.
Yeah, I've seen it pretty for a long time, and it's just a natural path. College, it was all about the beer, and wine was maybe a little tough to get close to and get to know. Certainly hard to afford until you started actually making enough money to buy it, and then you want to know more and know what you should be buying. So the question I saw here too, George, asked the question about the Miller family. Yeah, Miller family owns Biennacido. They may have some partners, they may have some investors, but they are the family behind Biennacido for sure. I'm not sure if you're associating them to any other business, but I think that they are the founders and the planters of Biennacido going back to the early 1970s.
Yeah, that Pinot Noir that I referenced was amazing. Yeah, $10
Cool.
at Costco. I think this list supposedly is 20, but for a while they had it $20 with $10 off per bottle.
Wow. Damn. That's pretty impressive. It was a private label wine that they made for Costco under and it said Biennacido on it.
It did not say Biennacido. They had to label it as, I believe it was Santa Barbara County, but it was impressive.
Wow. Anytime you can buy a decent bottle of wine for $10, and
yeah,
Costco,
San Luis Obispo was the appellation.
Oh, well, San Luis Obispo Coast is a new appellation. Maybe that was more of the spirit behind that too, is getting it into a lot of Costco mouths. So people would talk about San Luis Obispo as an appellation. That's a marketing plan right there.
Well, either that or that's a lot of extra wine.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily think there's a lot of extra wine, but certainly there are some big growers in Slow Coast that would benefit from more people learning about it that didn't want to necessarily break their brand name by going to Costco for $10.
Yeah.
And so that could be a nice, and they could have even gotten subsidized by the state of California to do that, because when you get the Slow Coast appellation, you start to apply for some different grants and stuff, and they got some good grant money to promote Slow Coast. So I'm not sure, where that money starts and stops, but there's a lot of different smart people out there that can take advantage of those type of things. And grape growers are some of them. Well, I've enjoyed talking to you guys. I appreciate the time you've given me. We've gone over a little bit here, and thank you all very much. I hope that 24 allows all of our boats to rise in the harbors that we dock them in, and that we can do some amazing stuff together, or amazing stuff to make life a little bit more enjoyable going forward. 23 had its, I was lamenting about 23 as I write a little letter every year to my family. I probably had more highs and more lows in 23 than any year I can remember. The highs were the highest and the lows were pretty damn low. So I'd love to see fewer of those and more of those high points, but 23 found me seeing a record number of concerts and comedy shows and things to really let me escape. That's what I do. Also, my little Dodger fantasy thing will take a huge part of my life in 2024. First time in my life I ever bought season tickets, and I bought them before they got Shohei Ohtani. So I'm very excited because I think the prices went up even more.